Hello, welcome back to Tanner Style. I'm Oliver Tanner. We are back in Osawatomie, Kansas. It's a beautiful day outside, and Feliz Cinco de Mayo. Today we are going to make a Mexican classic, mole. Many people have heard of mole. They think of it as Mexican chocolate sauce, right? But it's far from a Mexican chocolate sauce. There is some chocolate. We're going to use some chocolate today in our mole, but it is definitely not the most prominent or the most important ingredient in what we're making. The other way that people often make mole is out of a jar. In a store, a little glass jar says mole on it, and you just add water to that and there you go. That stuff is not bad. We're not about just following recipes or making stuff out of a can out here. We're about learning how to cook and learning the process, learning how to do it without a recipe. That's how we're going to be making mole today. We're just using the basic idea of how mole is made and kind of the idea of what it's made from. Okay, I did not have a recipe as I went and I selected all these ingredients, just my understanding of mole, and that's all that we're working from. First, let's look at what we're cooking with. So we've got a good number of chile ancho, dried chilies as well, and then we've got some guajillo chilies. We've got New Mexico chilies. We've got California chilies with some chipotle chilies. We got an onion and a head of garlic. We'll probably use almost the whole head. We've got some tomatillos with some jitomate or big tomato. We're going to add some bread products. We've got 2 old dried up tortillas and a piece of stale bread. We've got our fruit component with some raisins or pasillas, right? We've got some prunes and we've got some tamarindo. So that's going to cover our fruit component of the dish. For the nut component, we have Spanish peanuts as well. I had some pecans around the house, so I just grabbed some pecans. None of this is measured out. Okay, it's all just kind of eyeballed. For our spices, we've got a couple sticks of cinnamon. We've got some bay leaves. We have some fennel seed as well. We have some sesame seeds and some whole cumin. We've also got a bunch of cilantro that we're going to use, and then we're going to add some oregano as well. And yes, of course, we're going to use some chocolate. This is just, the brick Mexican hot chocolate you're going to find in the Mexican section of any grocery store that carries it. So which, we have Abuelita chocolate. I know that there are other brands, there are other types of chocolate. You can use any of them, it really doesn't matter. The specifics of what you use in your mole isn't really so important. And we're going to talk about why a little bit later. But right now, let's start prepping. Okay, so we are done with what prep we need to do before we start our cooking process. All we did was we deveined and seeded our chilies, peeled some garlic, we peeled our onion, cut it into some big pieces. Let's see, we peeled and seeded our tamarindo. Anytime you're using tamarindo, you want to make sure you get the seeds out. The seeds are really hard, they're like little rocks. And so anyway, now we are going to head over to the fire and we're going to get going. First thing we're going to do, so there's kind of an order to how we're going to do this, okay? First thing we want to do, we want to toast our seeds, right? So we got our sesame seed, we got our cumin, we got our fennel seed. We're going to toast that up, get all of our spices toasted, set them aside. Then after that, we're going to add some oil. And with the oil, we're then going to go ahead and we're going to fry all of our chilies. We're going to fry almost everything else. And then when we're done with all that, we'll head back over here. Anyway, meet you over by the fire. We're here by the fire. We're going to get going with toasting up our seeds. We just want a hot, dry pan. You know, our sesame seeds and our cumin are about the same size. We want them in a nice, even layer. We just want to toast them until we can smell them releasing their aroma. And I'm going to toast the fennel seed in the same way. We may also toast the cinnamon a little bit. We are not going to toast our bay leaves. I'm just going to get to it. The next step is we're going to start frying up everything. Now, just about everything in this is going to be fried, okay? When you do this at home, you can go ahead and use vegetable oil if you want. I guess you could try using olive oil. I wouldn't recommend it. What I'm going to use, which I think is a little bit more of the authentic ingredient, is lard, okay? Now, for anybody in there who's, you know, thinking, ew, lard's gross, that's pig fat. You're right, it is pig fat, and lard is delicious. Lard is actually a lot more healthy for you than most people think. You probably are thinking that lard is disgusting and unhealthy and it's going to clog your arteries and all kinds of other stuff. A lot of that stuff isn't actually true. Lard's kind of gotten a bad rap. There are some things like shortening that really are not very good for you. There are a lot of negatives to shortening. Now with lard, kind of the kicker is if you have lard that is not hydrogenated, that's really the best lard to use. Unfortunately, I believe this is hydrogenated. And I don't understand why they are hydrogenating lard that really doesn't need it. We're going to melt our lard and start frying things up. Okay, so we've finished frying all of our chilies. As you saw, they kind of turned a nut brown. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for them to turn a nut brown. They don't take very long to cook. That's why I was only adding like 1, maybe 2 or 3 chilies at a time at the most, is because they cook so quickly. I don't want to have so many in there that I can't get to one and then it overcooks and it burns, because you're going to ruin the flavor. All right? A lot of the flavor from mole is from these chilies. They're one of the biggest, most important parts of a mole to give it the chili, to give it the flavor. Now, of course, this is a mole poblano. Those ancho chiles, they're also called poblano chilies. And I had a lot more of them than other chilies. That's where the base of the flavor is actually coming from with a mole poblano. And there's a lot of different kind of moles. We're going to set the chilies aside and move on to frying everything else. So we finally finished with frying everything up, and there's a reason why we did things in the order that we did. You'll see in the little montage that we made. We started with the chilies. We worked our way through the onions and the garlic, through the tomatoes, through the fruit, through the nuts, and then we finally finished up with the bread products. And the reason why we did that in that order was to build flavor and to impart flavor, because that lard, although it has its own flavor that it also imparts, it takes on some of the flavor from some of these things that we fry, and we want to preserve and spread that flavor around as much as we can. Remember, everything is going to get pureed and mixed together in the end, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to grab every last bit of that flavor that we can. And especially those bread products, they're going to soak up some of that oil, they're going to soak up some of that flavor right at the end. I did try to give at least some kind of a shot of each product, what it should look like when it's done frying, so that you, when you're trying to make this at home, you can tell when it's done, okay? I often say things are finished when they're done cooking, but you need to know what it looks like when it's done cooking. All right, so now, anyway, we're gonna keep moving on. The next step, we have our chilies. Now, our chilies, you might have seen before we cooked them, they were kind of pliable. They were definitely dried out. They were kind of pliable. When we stuck them in the oil, they got really pliable, okay? All that heat made them really pliable. Now they're cooled down and fried. They are extremely crisp and crunchy, and these things will break easily. We don't really want that for our mole because we need to turn these into a sauce. Hard to turn something crunchy and hard into a sauce. So what we need to do right now is rehydrate them. And we have all of our chilies in another Dutch oven. All right, and we are going to pour in a bunch of water. We just want to cover the chilies. Now, we don't need to fill up the whole pan because the chilies are going to collapse as they soften up. To help with that and keep them all submerged and everything, we have a tool. It's a plate. And so we're going to weigh it down with a plate, because if we don't put the plate on there, they're all going to want to float up to the top. So we're just going to kind of leave those for a while, and we're going to let them rehydrate, reconstitute, and then they'll be ready to start pureeing. We're going to go ahead and we're going to puree all of our other ingredients. When you're pureeing a mole, you're getting the sauce ready, there's basically two parts to the sauce. There's the chilies, and then there's everything else, okay? And we're gonna puree them separate. We're gonna mix them together at the end. Before we head over there and do that though, I wanna take a minute and wanna talk to you about mole. Now, what is mole? Now, on this channel, I keep on saying that I'm not about sharing recipes, I'm about sharing what and how. Okay, we want to talk about what the food is, how it's made. We're doing the process right now so you can see the how, but what is mole? You know, I looked up online last night. I found a few different websites that had things like mole may have Aztec origins or Mayan origins, and nobody really knows. And it may come from the Aztec word moli, M-O-L-L-I. And I don't know which of those is true, but you know, I just can't help but notice that everything in mole is ground up into a paste and then becomes a sauce. So everything is ground. The Spanish verb for to grind is moler. So when it's ground, it's molido. So mole, I know it kind of sounds to me like it's really just describing exactly what it is. It's a bunch of ground up leftovers, really. And you know, I'm sure I just offended a bunch of people who are saying, mole is a lot more than just leftovers, buddy. Okay, but you know, at its root, it's really not. There are tons, almost endless varieties of mole. Not all mole has these chilies. There's mole negro, there's mole verde, there's lots and lots of different kinds of mole. And the reason why there's lots and lots of different kinds of mole is because people in lots of different parts of Mexico from different cultures ate different kinds of things. In some places, they had chilies a lot more. In other places, they had seeds, like seeds from squashes, pumpkins, things like that, which is where kind of the green from some of the mole verde comes from. Okay? So they ate different things, and they would use different things to grind up and make into a sauce, making different kinds of mole. You see, the thing is that for most of human history, people have not really been cooking for the sake of having something wonderful and fruity and, you know, to have dinner parties. That isn't really the purpose for most cooking throughout human history. Most of it is to not starve to death, because people really had to fight to not starve to death. And so because of that struggle to not starve to death, and it was pretty much a constant struggle for just about everybody worldwide for most of human history, well, because of that, people would get creative in how to never, ever, ever waste food, how to use absolutely every part of everything, no matter if it's old. This is why we use stale tortillas and old stale bread in mole. Look, anytime you're dealing with a recipe and it calls for stale bread or old dried out tortillas, nobody was thinking, you know what? I need to let some bread go stale just to make this dish perfect. Okay? You're dealing with a dish that was basically made from leftovers. And there's lots of these kinds of dishes. Bread pudding is a dish made of leftovers, old bread that was no longer really edible. And how do we make it edible again? Well, we make bread pudding. Lots of dishes, like I say, every culture has at least one of these dishes. And you know, the thing is, a lot of times these dishes become some of the best dishes that there are. And so this is why we see with mole, we see a handful of nuts, we see a few raisins, we see a few prunes, we see a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We don't really see a whole lot of anything other than the chilies. And I'm pretty sure that the way that mole came about, like I just talked about, how there's basically two parts to the sauce. There's all the other stuff, and then there's the chilies, right? And I'm pretty sure that basically what happened was whoever made mole first had a bunch of the other stuff, and they ground it up because that's what they did with their food, okay? This was kind of the method that they had of preparing their food. They ground it up, and they were like, okay, well, let's try it. And they tried it, and they were like, you know, it's okay, but it needs something. And these are cultures that use chilies frequently. And so what did they do? They used what they had. They used what they knew. They took chilies, fried them, reconstituted them the same way that they had been doing for a long time, the same way that they had learned to use these chilies with other recipes. And they just took the two things, mixed them, and bada bing, bada boom, holy cow, it tastes amazing. And so now we have mole. And, you know, then people would maybe make it intentionally later on. But at its root, mole is leftovers. It's scraps. And this is why, like, I added a handful of pecans, right? And I added the pecans not because they're authentic to Mexico, because I don't think the pecans are authentic to Mexican cuisine. I used them to help to illustrate this principle of mole, that it's basically what you have laying around, with a few other things intentionally added to round out the flavor, to add some more to it, and to make it a more than palatable meal. Mole is beyond palatable. It's very good. Okay, and this is where also that notion of Mexican chocolate sauce, it's just wrong. Okay, nobody sat around going, well, gosh, how do I make a sauce out of this chocolate that's kind of Mexican-y? Yeah, that never happened. Nobody set out to make a sauce out of chocolate. They just had some chocolate laying around, and that's why the chocolate is in the mole. Really, the thing that is more special about mole and that is more intentional is the chilies. And this is why mole is really a great recipe to try without actually using a recipe. It's little bits of this and that, okay? And I encourage you to find other leftover type recipes or dishes, rather, not recipes, other leftover types of dishes from other cultures, even American type stuff. Before we head over there, I will mention the liquid. Usually when you're making this, you're going to use chicken stock. If you have chicken stock or chicken broth from the store, something like that, that would be ideal. We are not actually using chicken stock today. We are using something else that we had around, and what we're using is whey. We made some cheese at home. We have the whey left over as a byproduct of that. Let's go blend some crap up. Okay, so we're back by the fire. We finished pureeing the first half of the stuff, and we're going to pause from that for just a minute to come over here and get our chicken ready. Now, mole is usually served with chicken. You could, I don't see why you couldn't serve it with pork or something else like that. Chicken is traditional. You cook it however you want to cook it. I mean, I'm a gringo, so maybe you shouldn't take my word for it. I don't know, maybe there are going to be some Mexicans who are deeply offended that I said try something other than chicken. When you're making it with chicken, generally you want to brown, you want to kind of sear and brown both sides of your chicken, and then you're going to finish cooking it in the mole itself. Now we're going to go ahead and strain our puree. It has a lot of chunks in there. We don't really want the chunks. We want sauce. We don't want a puree. Okay, and so we're going to take a lot of those solids out, and we're actually going to discard a lot of those solids. We just want the really fine stuff and get those flavors. So at home, you may want to use fine mesh strainer. I find that those fine mesh strainers, when you're making mole and you're pushing it through everything, they really get gummed up and they're a real pain in the butt to clean. And so today I'm going to use a different tool. This is called a China cap. Okay, now if you are familiar with commercial equipment, then you should already know what a China cap is. These things are awesome for any kind of straining job. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using a colander. Holes are probably too big for this, and it might be a little bit messy. But, you know, you're not going to find a China cap at Walmart. But if you have some kind of a restaurant supply store around, a lot of times they will allow people to come in and just shop. They'll be open for retail. So I would recommend just go down, get yourself a China cap. Really, there's lots of great stuff in those places. That's where I would recommend that you buy all of your like wooden spoons, spatulas, scrapers, everything. We've got our puree, and you can already see it starting to come out there. And we can kind of stir this around, and you can see that what's coming out is a lot more refined than what we have in here. What we have in here is all gritty, okay, and you can really see that. What we have coming out is nice and smooth. That's what we want to keep, is all the nice and smooth stuff. Now, if we wanted, we could really press on this, squeeze out every last bit of moisture till what we have is a pretty dry, leftover gritty stuff. But if we push too hard, especially with this China cap, the holes are kind of large, right? So if we push too hard on this, we're going to push through a lot of the stuff that we don't necessarily want to push through. So we're going to be kind of gentle. We're going to move this around so we can get to some fresh holes that aren't clogged up. But for now, I'm just going to keep pushing this through. When I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scrape all the sides down to get anything lingering on the sides off. And I'm just going to continue this process with all of my pureed stuff. We are finally done with all of our pureeing, all of our straining. We went ahead and off camera, we just pureed the rest of the chilies. We set all of our solids aside. Now, normally at home, I would take all of those solids, all of those discards, I think I called them earlier. I would take all that and I would actually put it back through my blender another 2, maybe 3 times. Try to break it down even smaller. Just get all of everything that I can out of there. We're actually going to take it home. My kids want to try eating it later with something. And, you know, if you want, you can find a way to use it. Or you can discard it. It's up to you. If we were doing this with a molcajete or a stone mortar and pestle, for all the other gringos out there, we could keep on grinding this until it is like just all used up. And the only part of it that we would probably still want to straighten out is when we grind up the chilies. The chilies kind of get this, there's a skin on there, and those little bits of skin can like get caught in the back of your throat and your teeth, and not really the most pleasant. So definitely straightening that out. Anyway, so if we look down here, we can see we've got a little bit of a swirl going on. We can see the contrast between the pureed chilies and everything else. And as we cook all of this, then it's all going to homogenize. It's all going to become one even continuous substance. We are going to have a good mole, nice and smooth. So at this point, I think we are about ready to go ahead. We're going to add our chicken in here in a minute. And we're going to take this over, put it on the fire. So we're going to let it simmer. And we will check it after maybe 30, 35 minutes. And basically what we're going to be checking is the chicken cooked? Okay, and at that point in time, we'll probably finish up with some salt to get the flavor just right. We always want to save our seasoning with salt till the end of whatever it is that we're eating, right? Otherwise, we may end up with something that is too salty. I think we're just going to meet again when this is done, and we're going to try it and tell you how my mole made up out of whatever I thought looked good turns out. So everything should be pretty well cooked by now. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely cooked enough. So everything is definitely cooked. I've also added some salt to the mole to season it. We're going to use a tortilla to test our mole, see how it turned out. And so let's give it a try. I like it. So this tastes different from other moles that I've had in the past. It's a little bit spicier than I've made in the past. I've never actually added tamarindo before, and I think I can kind of taste it coming through. There's like a tanginess to it. It's almost a citrusy kind of a flavor, but it's not really citrus. It's that I'm pretty sure that's the tamarindo that I'm tasting. So there's tamarindo in there, and the plums are coming through. I've never added plums before. Does not taste like the stuff that comes out of a jar, but it's good. I like it. All right, so we're at the table. We got some beans and rice just for plating it. Let's try this out. Well, we cooked our tortilla maybe a little bit too much. That's good. Our chicken is nicely cooked. It's nice and moist in the center. It's cooked all the way through. And the mole just goes perfect with it, as mole tends to do. This mole turned out really good. I'm really pleased with the result. Again, I did this with no recipe. You can do it too with no recipe. It's just a matter of following the principles of how it's put together, following some basic techniques. Mole is one of those dishes that it's very time consuming. It takes all day to complete, but it is so worth all of the time, all of the effort. It's very simple to make. Okay, none of the techniques are really very difficult. They're just time consuming, and especially because there are so many ingredients to a good mole. There is no 5-ingredient mole that is made from scratch, is quick, and is good. Okay, it's just not a thing. That's not what mole is. And this is why mole is typically a dish that you'll see around holidays. It's typically something that people don't make every day. You know, it's a special occasion type of thing because of the effort that goes into it. Or it's a thing that maybe you make when you have a bunch of leftovers that all need to be used up. Thank you for joining us here today. We really appreciate you tuning in, watching our videos. If you would be so kind, we would really appreciate it if you could like this video, give us a thumbs up, if you could subscribe if you haven't already, and if you could share this video with your friends, family, anybody who you think would enjoy it. And feel free to try making your own version of mole at home. We'd also like it if you could please comment down below any questions, tips you may have. I especially do want comments from anybody who may be Mexican or has some Mexican ancestry, who has kind of their own ideas and feelings about mole. Let me know, how did I do? How did I do? What do you think of my mole that I made today? I'm a gringo, I'm not a Mexican. I do my best. And I'm trying to learn and do all of this the best I can. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.